Moloch. Moloch. Horrid king, besmeared with the blood of human sacrifice and the tears of parents. That's how John Milton describes Moloch within Paradise Lost. Within Paradise Lost, there's a war in heaven between Satan's angels and Michael's angels. Now, Satan's angels lose, and 1/3 of these angels become fallen angels, and they fall into hell, and they are kept there for now. Within hell, they hold court. They create pandemonium, and they hold court to decide, what are we going to do next? We just lost a war in heaven. What are we going to do next? Moloch turns up, and he says, we should take the war back to heaven. We should go back and fight. I would rather die fighting in heaven than stay here in hell. As you can tell, Milton kind of portrays Moloch as this impulsive, bloodthirsty character. While they're in court, in pandemonium, the fallen angels, they make other decisions. Mammon comes up and says, I think we should create a kingdom here in hell. That's what we should do. And then Satan has a different idea. He whispers into Beelzebub's ear, and then Beelzebub speaks on behalf of Satan to the court, and he says, I have a good idea. Why don't we corrupt God's new creation? God has just created this thing called man, humanity on earth. Why don't we corrupt that thing? That would really piss God off. He would hate that. And that's what happens. Now, this is a very interesting version of Moloch within Paradise Lost. Milton describes Moloch as just one of many fallen angels. The personality he gives Moloch is very similar to Khorne, the Chaos God from the Warhammer 40k universe. Khorne is a impulsive and bloodthirsty character that gains power from bloodshed. And it seems like Moloch is a very similar character, hungry for war. See, throughout history, Moloch has always been one of the darkest deities, one of the most evil gods in history, because Moloch always requires a sacrifice from you. You must sacrifice your animals, you must sacrifice your children to Moloch in order to gain rewards. That's the concept. In more modern times, we might vision Moloch as a bull-headed human, or a bronze sculpture of a bull-headed human that people would pass their children in flames in order to gain rewards. That's how we vision Moloch today. But some scholars, esoteric and, religious scholars, historic scholars, have now said that Moloch actually comes from the etymology of the word Molk, which is a Molk offering. That is the ritual of sacrifice itself. That's what Moloch is. It's actually just the ritual. And from that, people have said that because of that, Moloch has never been a deity that anyone has ever worshipped. That's what some people are saying. Scholars would disagree with that, of course. They would disagree because Moloch has become something much bigger than that since then. No one would deny that actually people did give a Molk offering to a deity called Moloch. That's what happened. See, that's how things develop over time. Just because the word Moloch maybe originally meant the ritual sacrifice doesn't mean it didn't become a deity. For example, this is just how things happen. Like in Greek mythology, you have Nike, the god of victory. But the word Nike, before the god was even personified, meant victory. And then it became, that's what happened. And then the word victory as we use it today comes from the word Victoria. Victoria was the development of Nike. See how this is just how things develop. Another example would be Mammon, who is the other fallen angel in Paradise Lost. Mammon originally meant greed or wealth, and then became personified as the god of wealth. Within the Bible, I think God says you cannot give yourself to God and Mammon. And then from that, people were like, we should personify this greed into a god, the god of greed, Mammon. That's how things develop over time. Also consider this. Throughout history, traditions and gods, they merge. They overlap. Ideas overlap. many gods are derivative of older gods from different traditions. We know this, you know this. I want you to imagine this. Imagine that you are a Roman soldier. Pretty cool, right? Imagine you are a Roman soldier and you enter Carthage. And when you arrive at Carthage, you witness the people there offering up children to a giant bronze statue with its arms out. And people present their children to the flames and they sacrifice their children to this gold bronze altar. Not only that, the women are told that they are not allowed to cry. They are told they cannot grieve. If they show any grief, it ruins the whole ceremony. If you were a Roman soldier, you would say, we need to burn this fucking city to the ground and we need to salt the earth afterwards. And eventually the Romans actually did do that. They did do that. Now this story of the child sacrifices at Carthage, it was actually originally a Greek story that was rewritten or redocumented by the Romans later on, after the conquest of Carthage. And many people believe that this story is fake, like there was no child sacrifice at Carthage. Although archaeologists have found piles of cremated children and signs of ritual sacrifices at the grounds of Carthage. So, it seems very likely. But what's really interesting about this story is the depiction of this bronze sculpture or statue that people were sacrificing to this deity, this image, this idol. It's very similar to the Moloch stories throughout history. It's very similar. But what's really interesting is in the Greek and Roman retelling of this story, they often say that they were sacrificing these children to Cronus. Basically, the god that devoured his own children, the god that's represented by Saturn, who basically is the devil. Saturn is also representing the devil throughout history. You can see what I mean? It's all merging together because also the sculpture resembles every kind of Moloch statue. And the Carthaginians were more likely worshipping or sacrificing children to Baal-Hamon, which is a separate entity to Baal. See what I mean? It's all the same shit, but you could say that all of these Molk offerings are to the same entity that could be represented by Saturn, which basically could be Satan. It's all the fucking same shit, right? It's all the same shit. Now, when it comes to today, we cannot talk about Moloch without talking about Bohemian Grove. Now, I know a lot of people are bored about talking about Bohemian Grove, but let's cover what Bohemian Grove is for just a moment, shall we? It's basically a space in the forest of California where the elite of the elite, including former presidents, would gather there in order to reenact a sacrifice in flames to a giant idol. It's basically the same as what was happening in Carthage, but they reenact it there in California. Richard Nixon, a former president, went to these events. He called it the faggiest shit he's ever seen. It makes me kind of appreciate Richard Nixon a bit. I need to look into that guy more. Anyway, he got demonized quite a lot, right? But anyway, that's what happens there. But the interesting part is they make this burnt offering to a giant owl. And people say that the owl represents Moloch. But other people say that's a false equivalency because the owl usually represents wisdom, knowledge, secret knowledge, or seeing in the dark, seeing things that you cannot see. That's what the owl represents. And that's why you'll see the owl on everything within these Freemason and occult circles. You'll see the owl everywhere. Now, just because this ritual happens at Bohemian Grove, does that mean really the owl represents Moloch? Well, yes. Do you know why? Because David Icke says so. And if David Icke says so, then it's true. Everything David Icke says, if it's not true today, it's going to be true in 5 years' time. That's the way he works. He's on another plane of consciousness. He knows things that we do not. No, you have to respect the OG. Respect David Icke and his wisdom. So if he says so, the job is done, that's it. But like I said before, the owl, maybe it represents wisdom. But also, Moloch is the sacrifice, the Molk offering, is sometimes attributed to Cronus, is sometimes attributed to Saturn, is sometimes attributed to Baal-Hamon, is sometimes attributed to whoever, right? Baal, Moloch, anything. So whatever this sacrifice is, a burnt offering, it's a burnt offering to a god that requires a burnt offering. That is a bloodthirsty god, like Moloch. So that's why I would say, even though it seems like a false equivalency and it's a bit of a stretch, it's the same shit. Like I said, it's all the same shit. Oh, one more thing. Moloch. It comes from the Semitic word MLK originally, potentially. Moloch is a Molk offering, or also Melech, which means king in Hebrew, right? That's the roots. But a lot of these occult ritualistic sacrifice ideas have their roots in Egypt. Now, MLK. What is M in Egyptian hieroglyphics? It's an owl. Case closed. Case closed. Also, MLK stands for Martin Luther King. Was Martin Luther King a Molk offering to some... Okay, we'll stop there. Now, as you can see, Moloch has kind of taken on different forms throughout history, in one way or another, but it always surrounds the idea of sacrifice. And in more recent times, Moloch has become like a metaphor for sacrifice. There's a great essay called Meditations on Moloch by Scott Alexander. I'll link it in the description. But basically, he says that Moloch is the system as a whole, and we are sacrificing our time and energy to it. And we are sacrificing our children to this system by putting them through years of education, which really doesn't amount to much other than sacrificing their childhood in one way or another. That's an interesting concept. It gets a bit, maybe that's a bit boring though, right? I don't know, but that's an interesting idea. And it's interesting, the idea that we are sacrificing our time towards Moloch, because Saturn is sometimes referred to as the devourer of time, because it's like the slowest moving thing in the sky. That's what is said, because it's got this eerie movement and therefore it devours time. That's interesting. But I like to think of things more, I like to think about, but of course I like to think about things differently. Like, I prefer to think about Moloch as the elites of today literally sacrificing people to some sort of deity in order to consolidate money and power. I like to think of it that way. Not even in a metaphoric way if you think about the Jeffrey Epstein files, but in a metaphoric way. Because I want you to consider this. Like I said in my previous video on my other channel, World War I, World War II, 100 million people died. That was a Molk offering towards a deity. And a small number of people capitalized on this, and they consolidated power and money. And they did gain rewards from Moloch. And even today, like, you can think about wars that are happening around the world today. Are they ritual sacrifices in one way or another in order to consolidate money to a small group of people? I would say they are. They always have been. That's how the system works. People are giving Molk offerings to something in order to consolidate money. They are feeding the blood. They are giving blood to the blood god. That's what they are doing. And consider what's happening right now. As I'm recording this today, Iran is getting bombed and there's this conflict going on in Iran, in the Middle East. Who is benefiting from that? Who is going to benefit from that? These deaths that are happening right there and right now. Who is going to benefit from that? The same in Ukraine right now. Who is benefiting from that? Is it the people? It's sad to think about. I always think it's sad to think about when the idea of a ritual sacrifice. The funny thing about Iran, actually, is they recently burnt a giant effigy that resembles Moloch. I think it has Baal on the inscription on the chest. They say it's Baal, but it's a similar vibe. Baal, Moloch, Saturn, Satan, Cronus, whatever you want to call it. They basically burnt an effigy that represents evil. And then literally weeks later, they are getting bombed by Israel and the United States. Isn't that strange? It makes you wonder sometimes, like, who are the good guys, Who are the good guys? Anyway, that's a geopolitical thing that I don't want to talk about. Anyway, as you can tell, I'm running out of steam. Hopefully this was a good video. This is a channel for videos I would not post on my others. This is for dumb videos where I just try to explain random stuff which does not relate to artificial intelligence. But that's everything. Thank you.